They slept soundly that night, every last one of them, warm inside their stone walls, fires burning low, children dreaming, warriors resting, a king lying beside his mistress without a single troubled thought. Not one of them knew that the woman he had just thrown into the rain was spending the last breath of her body in the mud outside their gate, pouring every remaining drop of herself into the ground to keep them safe. Not one of them would understand what they had lost until it was far, far too late. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you are already hooked in on today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We like to know our pack members from all over the world. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The night her husband put her out, Alara did not cry. She had made that decision somewhere between waking that morning and walking through the Great Hall for the final time. She would not give them tears. Not with Kira standing beside the throne in a gown the color of winter roses, her hand resting on Aldrich's arm like she had always belonged there. Not with the court assembled in their long, gleaming rows, watching with the careful stillness of people who had already chosen their side and were simply waiting for the formality to conclude. The Hall of Ironvale's great keep had never looked more beautiful, and Alara had never felt more like a ghost inside it. Every iron sconce had been lit, 2 long burning rows of gold against ancient stone, because someone had wanted every face illuminated, every witness accounted for, every moment of this witnessed cleanly. Kira's doing, most likely. Kira was precise about these things. King Aldrich stood at the head of the hall on the raised dais, where Alara had stood beside him for 7 years. He was not a weak man. That was the thing that had always made this harder. He was considered, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of winter slate that had once looked at her with a warmth she had been foolish enough to call love. He looked at her now the way a man looks at a problem he has convinced himself he is elegantly resolved. Alara. Just her name. No title. That had been stripped 3 days ago, quietly, with the particular cowardice of a man who wants to diminish you before he discards you so the discarding looks smaller than it is. This court has deliberated, he said. What is spoken now comes not from anger, nor from haste, but from the considered judgment of your king and his council. His council. The same council she had healed, whose children she had sat with through fever, whose warriors she had pulled from the edge of death with her mother's remedies and her own exhausted hands. They stood in their ceremonial positions now and did not meet her eyes. You came to this kingdom as a bride. You were given every honor, every resource, every opportunity to prove yourself worthy of standing beside your king. A pause brief, the ghost of something that might once have been a conscience. We cannot ignore what has been brought before this court. You have become a liability this kingdom can no longer afford. Liability. She heard her mother's voice then, rising from years ago. They use words like that when they're afraid, little one. It means they can feel something they don't understand. Lisa had been dead for 2 years. Alara still heard her every single day. A voice cut through the hall's silence, sharp and furious and immediately recognizable. This is wrong. Kale, pushing through the assembled court with the expression of a man paying a cost he had already calculated and accepted. She has healed every one of you. She has stood beside this king through every dark season of his reign and asked for nothing in return. Kale. Aldrich's voice dropped into the register of absolute command. Kale's jaw locked. His eyes found hers across the hall, dark and furious and full of something she had never let herself examine directly. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Don't. It won't change anything. And it will cost you everything. She watched him understand it. Watched him hate it. Watched him go still. All right, she said. The only 2 words there were. She turned and walked from the hall and did not look back, and she told herself this was not the end of her story. Even as the doors closed behind her and the torchlight disappeared and she stepped out into the dark and the cold and the rain that had been waiting for her all along. She just didn't know yet how catastrophically right she was. Chapter 2. She had given that man everything. People didn't understand what that meant, not in the way she understood it. walking back to the chamber that had been hers for 7 years to collect what little in it actually belonged to her. Devotion as Alara had practiced it, as her mother had taught her to practice it, was not performed in grand visible gestures. It lived in the 4 consecutive nights she had sat beside Aldrich's sickbed in the 2nd year of their marriage, compounding fever medicines by firelight with her hands steady and her heart terrified, pulling him back from an infection that had already taken 2 men in the keep. It lived in the winter she had moved through the castle room by room, warrior by warrior, child by child, containing a chest illness that could have emptied the kingdom entirely. It lived in every early morning in the East Wing workroom, every soldier she had healed who thanked her with silence, every elder she had helped who forgot her face by the following week. She had never asked to be remembered. She had asked only, in the wordless way that people ask for the essential things, to be worth keeping. She packed quickly. Her mother's herb journals, Lisa's handwriting filling every margin in that small, precise, beloved script. A change of clothes. The glass vial of dried mountain sage Lisa had pressed into her hands 2 years ago on her deathbed, her eyes still fierce above the pallor, her voice very steady. Keep this near you, little one. You'll understand why, when the time comes. She had understood. She hadn't known the time would come this fast. The story had not begun in that hall. It had begun in a small stone house in the mountains, with a woman who smelled of wood smoke and dried lavender bending over a work table, teaching her daughter the names of things. Lisa had been the village healer for 30 years, a woman who moved through mountain communities with 200 remedies pressed into her memory, like flowers into a journal. She taught Alara to identify herbs by scent before she could write, to prepare poultices before she could braid her own hair, to listen to a body's distress the way a musician listens for a note played wrong. She taught her, most importantly, that her worth was not a thing other people granted. It was a thing she carried already. They will try to tell you what you are worth, Lisa had said once, beside the fire while the mountain wind worked at the shutters. They will say it with great certainty. Your only job is to know the difference between what they see and what is true. Alara had been 12. She had stored those words in the place where she kept things she needed to survive. She arrived in Ironvale at 17, a political bride with her mother's journals in her bag and Lisa's hands cupping her face and Lisa's eyes very bright. You are more than they know, little one. Be careful with that. She had been careful. For 7 years she had been so careful. The power came the year after Lisa died, all at once, the year she turned 23, waking one night with her hands burning and pale silver-white light gathering between her fingers. A protective gift. A gift for building walls. For pressing her palms to the earth and sealing a territory's borders against the dark, ancient force that had been moving through surrounding kingdoms for 3 years, emptying homes, silencing settlements. She had built 5 barriers for Ironvale in 3 years. Each one cost more. Each one left her thinner, slower, quieter in the way of things stretched past their natural limit. The court called it a mystery ailment. Kira, who had arrived 2 years ago with her luminous eyes and her talent for patient, invisible destruction, called it a curse. And Aldrich, in that hall tonight, had called her a liability. Alara pressed the sage vial against her ribs and walked out into the rain. She had reached the outer gate when the vision struck, not sleep, but a wall of sensation hitting her chest, stopping her feet entirely. The barrier she had built 6 months ago was fraying. She could feel it the way you feel a rope beginning to split before it snaps. And behind it, darkness moving, bearing down, closer and heavier than it had ever been, as though it had been waiting for exactly this moment, for exactly this crack in the wall. She stood at the gate of the kingdom that had just thrown her out and felt it bearing down on every sleeping soul behind her. She thought of her mother. You give because it is who you are, little one, not because of who receives it. Alara set down her satchel. She pressed her burning hands against the cold earth. What happened next would either save them all or finally, completely, destroy her. Chapter 3. She built it at the gate, in the mud and the rain and the dark, with her husband's decree still ringing in her ears. She had always held back before. Always measured, always conserved, always pulled away from the very edge because she had understood, in the direct, physical way her gift gave understanding, that if she emptied herself completely, she would not survive it. Tonight she did not pull back. She drove the light down through the frost, and the soil, and the deep root-threaded dark beneath it, all the way to the bedrock of Iron Veil's territory, anchoring the barrier in something that would not shift or thin or be worn through. She drove it with everything, every reserve she had spent 3 years quietly hoarding. She built it with the grief of her mother's empty house in the mountains. She built it with 7 years of devotion repaid with a public decree and Kira's small satisfied smile. She built it with the memory of every warrior she had healed who looked past her upon recovery. Every sleepless night in the East Wing workroom. Every morning she had woken inside these walls and felt the specific ache of being surrounded by people and belonging to none of them. She built it with Kale's furious, helpless eyes finding hers across the hall. She built it with her mother's voice. You give because it is who you are. She built the strongest barrier she had ever made. And when it sealed, when she felt the dark force hit it and find nothing, no gap, no weakness, no way through, she went out like a flame. She was on her back in the mud before she knew she was falling. Rain on her face. Hands open in the mud beside her. The cold moving through her from the ground upward, slow and patient and complete. She could not move. Could barely feel the rain anymore. I think I'm done, she said to Lisa in the quiet inside her own head. I think that was the last one. Behind her, warm and breathing and blissfully unknowing, Iron Veil slept on. Aldrich slept. Kira slept. Every warrior she had healed, every child she had tended, every council member who had sat in careful judgment slept, every last one of them safe inside walls a discarded queen had built with the final reserves of her own life. The rain fell. The cold deepened. The darkness pressed low. And not one soul came. He only knew she was barely alive in his arms, and he had waited too long to say what he should have said years ago, and he would not let that be the ending. Chapter 5. Sable worked on her for 3 hours. Kale sat on the bench outside the healer's door and did not move. The Ashvin settlement was quiet around him with the specific quiet of a community that had learned to move softly. He had noticed the gaps when he arrived. Empty hearths. Absent faces. The flinching quality of people who had been hit and were still waiting to find out if it was over. An Ashvin elder brought him something hot and sat beside him without asking permission. Sheer mate? The man asked. Kale looked at the closed door. Not officially, he said. But as close to it as anything I know how to name. The elder nodded as though that were a complete answer. He stayed. Inside, Alara moved through something warm and luminous, a quality of presence she could feel but not locate, familiar the way a beloved place smells familiar. She thought she caught mountain sage. She thought she heard, at the edge of everything, a voice she had been missing for 2 years. Not yet, little one. Not yet. Then Sable's sharp, certain voice cut through. There you are. Come back. Come on. She came back. Slow, then sudden gray to firelight to the smell of lavender and valerian pressing in around her. She catalogued it automatically, the habit of years, good remedies, good hands. Someone who knew what they were doing had kept her alive while she was gone. You were nearly gone, Sable told her. Just information. Not drama. I know, Alara said. Her voice came out scraped thin. Whatever your body was used for, it was beyond what a body is built to sustain. Exhaustion, power depletion, exposure, starvation, all of them layered, and underneath all of them something drawn from you repeatedly over a long period of time until there was almost nothing left. Sable looked at her directly. I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm telling you what I found so you understand the size of what you survived. Alara lay still, pressed her palm flat against the blanket. And beneath the ordinary sensation of linen and wood and the fire's warmth, she felt it. The barrier. Still there. Still holding. A quiet, steady hum. She had survived. And it had held. When Cale came through the door, the relief moving through his face like something breaking loose, she felt something in her chest shift. He sat. He looked at her. "You left without me," he said. "You weren't invited." "I'm aware." His jaw tight. "Alara. What happened out there?" She told him the stripped-down version. The barriers. 3 years of them. The one at the gate, the largest she had ever built. That she had not expected to survive it. The silence that followed had the weight of stone. "I didn't choose to die," she said quickly. "I simply ran out. I knew the risk, and I did it anyway. I needed it to hold." He looked at her for a long, terrible moment. Looked away. Breathed through whatever that did to him. She watched it happen and felt something in her chest that was tired and grateful and, underneath both of those things, very close to love. Then Sable told her how many people Ashvin had lost in 3 months. 19. Alara stared at the ceiling and let the numbers settle into her like cold water, and she thought about all the people sleeping safely behind Ironvale's walls, and something quiet and inevitable took shape inside her chest. She already knew what she was going to do. She just needed to be strong enough to do it. Chapter 6. She felt the attack building 2 days before it arrived. The familiar pressure in the air. The forest beyond the settlement going silent in the specific way it went silent when something had moved into it that every creature with any instinct had already vacated. She said nothing to Cale. She spent those 2 days eating everything Sable put in front of her and sleeping every hour her body would accept, loading herself the way you load a weapon, and when the 4th morning came she rose before dawn, dressed in the dark, and walked to the tree line. She knelt. She pressed her palms to the cold earth and waited. Cale appeared behind her. "What are you doing?" In a moment. "Step back." She felt it coming in the soles of her feet, in the burning of her palms, in the way the air pressure shifted against Ashvin's border as the force bore down. She took one breath. She opened her hands. The light came up through her, pale silver white, finding the territory's edges and following them, building the wall she had learned to make across 3 years of desperate, solitary practice. She heard Cale make a sound she had never heard from him. Had no category for. The barrier sealed. The force hit it. The impact traveled through her body like a bell struck from the inside. She felt it in her teeth, her arms, the base of her spine. She locked her knees and stayed upright by sheer will alone, by the specific stubbornness of a woman who had been underestimated so long it had become its own kind of fuel. The force pressed. Found nothing. Receded. She lowered her hands. Her legs were shaking. She sat before they could decide for her. Cale was beside her before she finished folding. His hands found her shoulders. The settlement was awake around them, people pouring from doors into the gray dawn, staring at the shimmer at the tree line, staring at their own living hands, bewildered and unharmed. Cale was looking at her with an expression that had moved past shock into something harder and more permanent, the expression of a man rearranging the entire architecture of what he thought he understood. "The sickness," he said. "Very low. All those years. The episodes, the exhaustion, the way you were always slower after. That was this. You were doing this for Ironvale. The whole time." She held his eyes. "And they called you a liability," he said. "Yes." Something moved through his jaw. Something moved through his hands. He looked away, at the tree line, at the sealed border, at the ordinary birds sitting in ordinary trees on the other side of an extraordinary wall, and his breathing was very carefully controlled. "They don't know," he said. "No. They never knew. No." The Ashvin elder knelt before her in the frost. Deliberately. With full gravity. Asked her name and said it back like something worth keeping. "My settlement owes you a debt." She shook her head. "You gave me shelter when I had nothing. We're even." Cale's hand settled between her shoulder blades. Warm. Steady. Deliberate. She didn't move away from it. Later, quiet by the fire, Sable asked the question she had been waiting for. The Iron Veil barrier, the large one, the last one. How long would it hold? Alara stared into the flames for a long time. Not long enough, she said. And that night the vision came fast and total and breathless, not the gradual kind, but a door kicked open in her mind. She saw Iron Veil. She saw the barrier fraying from the inside like cloth held too long against a flame. She saw the dark force pressing through the gaps, moving through the streets, moving through the courtyards, moving through the keep itself like water finding cracks in stone. She sat up in the dark with her hands blazing and her heart slamming against her ribs. Iron Veil was not going to hold. And the kingdom that had thrown her out into the rain was about to discover, at extraordinary cost, exactly what it had thrown away. Chapter 7. The survivors arrived broken. That was the only word for it. Not shaken but recovering broken. In the specific way that people are broken when the thing that was supposed to protect them has turned out to be nothing at all, and the gap where safety used to live has been filled with something they have no name for and no defense against. The first group came through Ashvin's gate 9 days after the vision. Alara was at the settlement's edge when they emerged from the trees, and she recognized faces before she recognized names. Garek, Iron Veil's senior warrior, the man who had sat in the council chamber the day of her hearing and studied his hands throughout. Bryn, who had voted for the decree with her chin raised. A young court attendant whose joint inflammation Alara had treated for 2 years, who had thanked her every time in private and looked through her every time in public. They looked like people who had seen something they could not unsee. Garek stopped when he saw her. Something moved through his face: recognition, then shame, then something rawer than shame, something that had no polished name. His eyes went to the ground. They would not come back up. What happened? She asked him quietly. He told her. His voice was flat in the way voices go flat when the facts are too large to hold any color. The barriers had started failing 8 days ago, slowly at first, then all at once. The dark force had entered the territory without warning on the 3rd night. 12 dead in the first hours. Then 23 more across the following days. The keep's outer wards gone. The farming villages on the eastern border, silent. An entire street in the lower settlement had been found empty one morning, every door standing open. No sign of struggle, no sign of anything. Just absence, total and impossible and without explanation. The council tried everything, Garek said. Called in every healer in the eastern territories. Nothing worked. Nothing even slowed it down. He swallowed hard. We didn't understand. We had no idea why we were protected all those years and everyone around us wasn't. We thought it was the walls. We thought it was the geography. His jaw worked. We never thought to ask. Alara said nothing. We didn't know, he said, and the words came out cracked at their edges. We didn't know what you were doing. We didn't know what it cost you. He stopped. We just let them take you away. I know, she said. More came over the following days. 2s and 3s and once, 14 at once, emerging from the forest with the hollow-eyed, stripped-down urgency of people who have left everything behind. Each group brought new reports that made the picture worse. 38 dead, then 50. Crops failing in the outlying villages, not from drought or blight, but from the particular agricultural collapse that followed the dark force's passage, as though the land itself had been drained of something essential. Warriors who had fought in wars, who had faced things on battlefields that would break an ordinary person, arriving at Ashvin's gate visibly shaking, unable to articulate what they had faced except to say, "There was nothing we could do. There was nothing any of us could do." The council, by all accounts, had dissolved within 4 days. 3 of the members who had voted most loudly for Alara's removal were dead. 2 had fled eastward and not been heard from since. One, a man named Torval, who had spoken most eloquently in that hall about liabilities and the good of the kingdom, had arrived at the Ashvin gate alone, on foot, without boots, in a state that suggested he had been walking for days without sleeping. He stood at the gate and asked for the Healer Queen, and when the gatekeeper told him to describe who he meant, he said, very quietly, "The woman we put out. The woman whose name I said with my own mouth in that decree. The woman we should never have touched." He was let in. He sat at the communal fire and did not speak to anyone for 2 days. Elara watched all of it with the particular quality of stillness she had developed over years of receiving things she had not asked for and could not return. She directed the survivors to food and warmth without ceremony. She did not require gratitude. She did not require acknowledgement. She simply watched the Ashvin people, who had lost 19 of their own, and had every reason to keep their gates closed, open everything they had anyway. And she felt something move through her chest that was not triumph, was not satisfaction, but contained something honest at its core. Not "I told you so." Something quieter and heavier than that. More like, "Now you know." On the 5th day, a woman named Deva sought her out at the communal fire. A minor court functionary from Irevale, unremarkable, neither cruel nor kind, simply present across 7 years. Deva sat down and wrapped both hands around a cup and looked at the middle distance. "He's still there," she said. "Aldrich. He wouldn't leave with the evacuations. People tried, his own guard captains tried. He refused every time." She paused. "He's been asking for you. Every day since the barriers started failing. He sends runners to the settlements asking if you've been seen." She looked at Elara directly. "I think he finally understands what he did." "And Kira?" Elara asked. The expression on Deva's face answered before her words did. "Left 2 days before it got bad. Eastern caravan. 3 trunks, 2 household staff, no word to anyone." She pressed her lips together. She knew. She knew it was coming because she's the one who pushed you out before it arrived. She used him to get rid of the one thing standing between Irevale and destruction, and then she left him to face the consequences alone. A pause. He doesn't know that yet. Or maybe now he does. Either way, Deva looked at the fire. He's alone in that keep. 51 dead. His kingdom emptying around him. And every day he asks for you. Elara said nothing for a long time. She thought about what it meant to let a man sit inside the ruin of everything he had chosen. She thought about whether he deserved to sit there longer. She thought about the 51 dead and the open doors in the lower settlement and the warrior who had arrived without boots and the way Garek had not been able to lift his eyes from the ground. She thought about her mother. "You give because it is who you are, little one. Not because of who receives it." Kale's shoulder pressed against hers in the dark, warm, and saying nothing that needed to be said aloud. She let herself lean into it. Just enough. Just barely enough. But the Irevale barrier was almost gone now. She could feel it, the hum she always carried after building, going thinner by the hour, fraying towards silence. When it went completely, whatever was left inside those walls would face the dark entirely alone. And the cost, if she didn't go back, would be paid by people who had no voice in what was done to her. Children who had never voted. Servants who had never attended a council session. People who had been kind to her in small, unremarkable ways when the court was not watching. She pressed her hands flat against her knees. The decision was already made. It had been made the moment she heard the number 51. She simply needed the night to sit with the weight of it. She was going back. Not to forgive. Not yet, perhaps not ever. But because the innocent did not deserve to die for the guilty man's choices, and because her mother's voice lived in her chest like a compass, and it was pointing east. Chapter 8. On the 7th day, Marin came. Elara felt her before she saw her, the particular quality of a presence she had known for 7 years, the shift in the air her body had been calibrated to recognize. She was in the supply workroom with Sable when it happened. She set down the bundle in her hands and stood still. "Go," said Sable, without looking up. Marin was just inside the gate, standing apart from the group she had arrived with, arms wrapped around her own ribs. She looked smaller. That was the only word for it. Marin, who had always moved through every room like someone who belonged in it, looked as though the world had recently demonstrated it could not be trusted, and she was still deciding what to do with that information. She looked up. She saw Alara. And her face came apart. Alara stood still and watched it happen, watched the composure Marin had been holding together across what must have been a very long and very terrible week dissolve in layers, the way it does when the one person you most needed to see is suddenly in front of you, and the necessity of holding yourself together simply evaporates. Her eyes filled immediately. "Alara," she said. Barely a sound. "Come inside," Alara said. "You need to eat." She fed her. She waited. When the plate was empty and Marin had both hands around something hot and was staring into it, Alara sat across from her and let the silence do its work. "I knew it was wrong," Marin said finally. "Every second of standing in that hall I knew. And I looked at the floor because I couldn't look at your face, and I told myself there was nothing I could do." She pressed her lips together. "I told myself a great many things. None of them were true. I knew they weren't true while I was telling them." "I know," Alara said. "I saw your face." Marin's voice cracked. "I know you did." She set down the cup. Her hands were shaking. "I need to tell you something about Kira." Alara waited. She didn't come to Ironvale by accident. The flatness in Marin's voice was the flatness of someone recounting something too large for ordinary tone. "She came because of you. Because word had spread of the Healer Queen, of your knowledge, your influence. She came to take what you had, and she was patient. 2 years of invisible, careful, patient work. She planted every story about your health. She found council members willing to listen and fed them one at a time, told Aldrich your remedies were slow poison, that your recurring illnesses were proof of a curse you carried and were spreading to those around you. She never said anything that could be directly examined. Everything was plausibly whispered." Marin looked at her directly. "And she knew about the barriers. She didn't understand them, but she knew something you were doing was protecting the kingdom. So she made sure you were gone before the next cycle of attacks. She used him to remove you, and then she left before the walls came down." Alara was very still. "She used him." "She used him," Marin said. "And he let himself be used because she stopped. Started again. Because he was afraid of how much he needed you. Kira gave him a way to call that fear something else." She looked down at her hands. "That's not an excuse. I'm not making it one. I'm just telling you the whole of it." Alara looked at the fire. 51 dead. An empty street. A king sitting alone in his ruin asking for a woman he had thrown away. "What you did hurt me," Alara said at last. Steady, because it had been carried long enough to lose its jagged edges. Not just that night. The years of it. The friendship that only existed in corners because you were afraid of the cost of it being seen. "I understood your choices and I made peace with them, and they hurt anyway. I need you to know that." Marin nodded. Tears running freely. "I can't go back to what we were," Alara said. "I won't. I know. I'm not finished." A pause. "We can build something new. I don't know yet what that looks like. But I am not going to turn you away. That's what I have right now." Marin looked down at their joined hands. Alara had reached across without deciding to, the way the body sometimes knows before the mind does. "It's enough," Marin whispered. "It's more than enough." Later that night, alone in the dark, Alara lay on her back and felt the Ironvale barrier. Felt it going thread by thread, the way a life unravels. Slowly. Then suddenly. Then all at once. By morning it would be entirely gone. And Aldrich, sitting alone in his emptying keep, the man who had let Kira dismantle his marriage and his protection and his kingdom one careful whisper at a time, would have nothing left between himself and the full weight of the consequences he had chosen. She pressed her hands against the wall and breathed. She was going back. And this time, every person in that kingdom was going to understand exactly what they had thrown away. Chapter 9. She rode back to Ironvale at dawn. Kale beside her without question. Marin behind them without being asked. The road that had once carried her away in the rain now carried her back in early morning light, and the difference between those two versions of the same road was the difference between a woman who had nothing left and a woman who had learned what she was made of. The outer gate was open. No guards. The gatehouse empty. They rode through, and the keep was mostly hollow, hearths cold, halls silent, the particular absence of a place people have fled in a hurry with no expectation of return. Tapestries still hanging. Cups still on tables. The small, strange archaeology of a life interrupted mid-sentence. 51 dead. She had learned the final count from the last survivor group. 51 people who had lived inside the walls she had built and died inside the walls she was no longer there to maintain. She carried that number with her through every empty corridor. She did not try to put it down. She found Aldrich in the great hall. He was sitting on the dais steps in his shirt sleeves, no crown, no court, no performance left in him. He looked up when she walked in, and she saw what 7 days of watching his kingdom come apart had done to him. He had aged in the specific way that people age when they have understood something they cannot unfeel, stripped of every composure, every practiced certainty, every layer of the man who had stood at that dais and called her a liability with his counsel arranged behind him like a proof. What was left was just a man, sitting in the ruin of everything he had chosen, knowing exactly how he had gotten here. Alara. Her name in his mouth was different now, not the flat efficiency of the decree, not the measured distance of a king managing a difficult situation. Something broken at its edges. Something that had no more strategy in it. She did not go to him. She stopped in the center of the hall. "How many are left in the building?" she said. He blinked at the practicality of it. 11. Those who refuse to leave. Get them here. All of them. Now. He stood. He went. No debate, no negotiation, just stood and went, and that told her everything about where he was now compared to where he had been. She knelt in the center of the great hall and pressed her bare palms against the cold stone floor and reached down through it, through the foundation, through the bedrock, through the deep territorial roots of Ironvale, and felt what was there. The damage was significant. The dark force had moved through in waves across 7 days, and it had not been gentle. She could feel it in the land itself, in the particular exhaustion of soil that has been fed on rather than fed, in the absence where living energy should have been. The outlying farmlands were going to take months to recover. The eastern settlements would need rebuilding. The 51 dead would not come back. None of that could be undone. The cost of 8 days without protection had already been paid in full, and no barrier she built now would refund a single life. But the force was circling. She could feel it gathering beyond the border, pressing at the edges of the stripped territory, preparing to return for what it had not yet finished taking. She would not let it finish. By the time Aldrich returned with the 11 survivors, pale, frightened, wrapped in whatever they had grabbed, the light was already rising from her hands. She heard them stop when they saw it. Heard someone draw a sharp breath. Heard Aldrich make a sound she had never heard from him, low and undone and entirely too late. She built the barrier. She built it with everything she had, everything the Ashvin people had given her, everything Kale had given her, everything Marin had given her by finally choosing right. She drove it into the bedrock the way she had driven the Ashvin barrier, deep and permanent and anchored in something that would outlast her. She felt it reach Ironvale's borders and seal, and she felt the force outside hit it and find a wall it could not break. She lowered her hands. The light faded. 11 people stood in a cold hall and stared at her in a silence, so total she could hear the fire settling in the distant hearths. Kale was beside her before she fully registered sitting down, his arm around her, warm and immovable, the way he was always already there when she needed him. Aldrich had not moved. He was standing 6 feet away looking at her with a face she had never seen on him, not the composed face of a king, not the face of a man managing his image. Just a man. Standing in the specific wreckage of what he had chosen to believe about a woman he should never have let go. He stopped. You just saved it again. Yes, she said. After everything, he stopped again. His jaw worked. After what Alara, 51 people are dead, she said. Quietly. Not cruelly. But without softening it. 51 people who were alive 8 days ago because I was here, and who are dead now because I wasn't. Let that be the first thing you say to yourself every morning for the rest of your reign. Not a speech. Not an apology to me. That number. Every day. He looked like she had struck him. She held his eyes and did not look away. Kira used you, she continued. She came here knowing what I was doing for this kingdom, and she removed me before the walls could fall so that you would face the consequences and she would not. She understood exactly what would happen when I was gone. She planned around it. She used your fear of needing me to make you destroy the very thing that was keeping everyone alive. She paused. You let her. You chose to believe what was convenient. And 51 people paid for that choice with their lives. The silence in the hall was absolute. I am not here to forgive you, Alara said. I am here because children were going to die who had no part in what you did. I am here because my mother taught me who I am. That is the only reason. Kale's arm tightened around her. She leaned into it slightly, just enough for Aldrich to see. She watched something final move through Aldrich's face. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Just the specific devastation of a man who has been made to understand, completely and without mercy, the full dimension of what he destroyed. His eyes went to Kale's arm around her shoulders. Went to the calm certainty of her expression. Went to the hands in her lap that had just rebuilt his kingdom's walls for the 6th time. He lowered himself to one knee. Not performative. Not kingly. Simply a man going down onto the cold floor of a hall that had witnessed the worst decision of his life, with nothing left to offer but the weight of his understanding. I know it's not enough, he said. I know there is no enough for what I did. I know that. His voice was barely holding its shape. But I need you to know that I know it. Every life. Every name. I will carry them. Alara looked at him for a long moment. Get up, she said. There is a kingdom to rebuild. Start with the eastern villages. Start tomorrow. Don't stop. He got up. He did not ask for more than that. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. Outside, the dark retreated. The barrier held. And tomorrow, she would begin to decide what her life looked like now that she had stopped building it for people who were never going to protect it. Chapter 10. Spring came early to Ashvin, and Alara was there to see it. She noticed it first in the quality of light through the cabin window, lower and warmer in the mornings, falling across her mother's journals open on the work table, gilding the margins where Lisa's handwriting curved around the names of herbs that would be growing again soon in the mountain basin. She had been back at Ashvin for 3 weeks. Back at the settlement that had become, without her fully noticing the moment it happened, the first place in her adult life that felt like somewhere she was supposed to be. The work of rebuilding Ironvale was underway. Aldrich had followed every instruction she had left him, had started with the eastern villages, as she said, had begun the restorations, had been seen in the lower settlement himself helping with the structures that needed clearing, quietly. Without ceremony, the way someone works when they are not performing regret, but actually living inside it. He had sent no letters asking for forgiveness. He had sent only reports of progress, brief and practical, the way a man communicates when he understands that what he owes is action rather than words. 51 graves had been marked in Ironvale's eastern memorial ground. He had commissioned the stonework himself. He had stood at each one. Alara had heard this from Marin, who had gone back for a week to help with the herb stores in the keep's depleted workroom and had returned to Ashvin with the quiet, considered expression of someone slowly making peace with who they used to be. The Ashvin barrier hummed its deep note beneath the earth. The Ironvale barrier hummed its own note in the distance, steady, deep, permanent. Both of them holding. Both of them hers. She was at the table with her herbs and her journals when Kale came in from the woodpile and stopped in the doorway, the way he had been stopping in doorways recently, looking at her with less and less effort to look like he wasn't. "You're doing that thing again," she said without looking up. "What thing?" "The thinking loudly thing." He set down the wood. He came and sat across from her at the table, and she looked up then, because the silence had the specific quality it had the morning after they returned from Ironvale, the quality of someone who had decided to stop waiting. "I have something to tell you," he said. "I have been trying to find the right way to say it for approximately 5 years. I want you to know that the length of time is entirely due to cowardice and not to any absence of certainty in the feeling itself." She put down her pen. "I love you," he said. Straight and unhidden, the way he did everything once he had committed to doing it. "I have loved you since before I understood what the word meant when applied to a specific person. I love how you move through the world. I love the way you give without keeping a record of it. I love the way you kept saving people who did not deserve saving and did it without losing a single piece of who you are." He paused. "I should have said it years ago. I should have said it so many times you grew tired of hearing it. I'm sorry I didn't. I'm saying it now. I will say it every day for the rest of whatever life you'll let me spend beside you." The morning light lay warm and unhurried across the table between them. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You know, I have known for a very long time, Kale." Something moved across his face, exasperation, relief, and, underneath both of them, the specific undone quality of a man who has been holding something very carefully for 5 years and has just discovered he can put it down. "And you said nothing." "You said nothing first," she pointed out. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked briefly at the ceiling as though requesting patience from some higher authority, and then looked back at her with the exasperation entirely gone, leaving only what was underneath it. He reached across the table and took both her hands in his grip warm and certain and without any hesitation whatsoever, the way he did everything when he had finally committed. "Marry me," he said. Not a question shaped like a question. A declaration shaped like one. She looked at their joined hands. She thought about the girl who had arrived in Ironvale at 17 with her mother's journals and her quiet, careful devotion, and had spent 7 years pouring all of it into people who weighed her worth in columns. She thought about the gate in the rain, her hands in the mud, the last of everything she had flowing into the cold ground. She thought about waking in Sable's room to the smell of lavender and Kale's voice on the other side of the door. She thought about what it felt like to be chosen, not used, not managed, not kept until convenience suggested otherwise, but genuinely, clearly, deliberately chosen by someone who had seen every part of her and had decided long ago that this was where he wanted to stand. "Yes," she said. He laughed, real and unguarded and warm, the laugh she had always wanted more of, and she felt it move through both their joined hands, and she laughed too. And it had been so long since she had laughed without calculating what it cost that the sound surprised her, and then felt entirely right. Outside, the Ashvin settlement moved through a morning that was ordinary and extraordinary in equal measure. Lena was singing her tuneless, cheerful song near the common fire. Marin was visible through the window, crossing the path toward the workroom with her arms full of herb bundles, looking up when she heard the laughter and smiling, a real one, unguarded, the beginning of someone who was learning to be different than she had been. Sable stood in the workroom doorway and caught Alara's eye through the glass and lifted her cup once, short and dry and deeply genuine. The elder was in the settlement center, sitting in the morning sun with the particular contentment of someone who lives inside walls he trusts. The Ironvale survivors had mostly settled. Some had gone back to help rebuild. Garrick had been one of the first to return, had gone back the morning after Aldrich knelt, had stood at the eastern village sites with his hands in the dirt, working without direction, the way a man works when no one needs to tell him what he owes. Bryn had followed 2 days after. Then Torval, still quiet, still carrying something she suspected he would carry for a very long time, which was exactly right. They were paying. Not with their lives, she would never have wanted that. But with the specific, daily, unglamorous cost of understanding what they had done and choosing to spend every morning after in the direction of repair rather than avoidance. That was the only payment that meant anything. The only one worth collecting. Kale was still holding her hands across the table, looking at her with the expression of a man who has set down something very heavy and found his arms still work. "It's about time," she said, and she meant every layer of it, the question, the answer, the 5 years, the rain-soaked gate, the mud, the long dark road from that night to this golden morning. "It really is," he agreed. Outside, Lena's song carried on the warm air, and the frost was entirely gone from the ground now, and the Ashvin children were running between the cabins in the early spring light. Inside, Alara sat with her hands in Kale's and her mother's journals open beside her, and the quiet, deep, unshakable certainty of someone who has arrived finally, completely, without compromise, exactly where she belongs. She had been thrown out like she was nothing. She had turned out to be the thing that held everything together. And every person who had called her a liability had paid the full price of that mistake in ways they would spend the rest of their lives rebuilding from. But that was their story to carry now. Hers was just beginning, warm and chosen, and entirely, completely hers. Thank you so much for listening. If this story found you at the right moment, if it kept you company through a long commute, a quiet evening, a sleepless night, then you have no idea how much that means to me. Every single listen matters more than I can say. If you want more stories like this, stories that reach in and don't let go, subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so you never miss a new one. I am always writing the next one with you in mind. And if this story moved you, leave me a comment. Tell me the moment that stayed with you. Tell me what you felt. I read every single one. Until next time, I'll see you in the next story.